This is a reading from The Mystical City of God, the Coronation by Venerable Mary of Agreda, Volume 4, Book 2, Chapter 11. The Lord, by new favors, raises the Most Blessed Mary above the state described in the 8th chapter of this book. 595. In the 8th chapter, I have stated that the Queen of Heaven for 1,260 days was nourished and maintained in the condition and state described by the evangelist, as described in the 12th chapter of the Apocalypse. That number of days made up more or less 3.5 years, and brought the Most Blessed Mary to the 60th year of her life, plus 2 months and a few days, and the 45th of the Lord. Just as the stone falls the more swiftly the closer it approaches to its center of gravity, so in proportion as the great Queen and Mistress of all the creatures advanced toward the end of her most holy life, the more swift became also the flight of her purest spirit, and the impulse of her desires to arrive at the center of her eternal rest and repose. From the moment of her immaculate conception, she had issued forth like a vast river from the ocean of divinity, where she was conceived in the eternal ages, and by the inundations of gifts, graces, favors, virtues, merits, and holiness, she was now grown in greatness beyond the limited sphere of all creation. The impetuous floods of her wisdom and love resistlessly rushed back to unite themselves with the ocean of the infinite, for thence she had issued only in order to shed forth over and over again her maternal clemency upon the Church. Ecclesiasticus chapter 1, verse 7. 596. In these last years of her life, the great Queen had already, by the violence of her love, begun to suffer a sort of ceaseless martyrdom. Without a doubt, it is true in the spiritual order that what philosophers claim in the corporal, that the nearer a moving object approaches its center of attraction, the more powerfully it is drawn to that center. And the Most Blessed Mary had now approached so closely to the infinite and highest good that she was divided from it, as is said in the Canticles, Canticles chapter 2, verse 9. Only the grating or partition of mortality. Only by the grating or partition of mortality. Thus, this did not any more suffice to impede the reciprocal vision and love, and between them was only the vast force of love, impatient of all hindrances, to complete the union, so that all other desires were swallowed up by the one immense desire of overcoming and doing away with these hindrances. Such was the desire of her divine Son, held back only by his reluctance to deprive his Church of such a teacher. Such was also the desire of the Most Holy Mother, who, although she restrained herself from asking for the natural death, could not restrain the forces of her love, and thus felt the violence of the constraint of mortal life and of the fetters hindering her flight. 597. Yet as long as the conditions predetermined by the eternal wisdom had not arrived, she continued to suffer the pains of that love, which is strong as death. Canticle chapter 8, verse 6. Through them, she called upon her beloved, who came from his retreat from the mountains to dwell in the village of the plains. Canticle chapter 7, verse 11, to view the flowers and the fragrant fruits of his vineyard. And by the darts of her eyes and of her desires, she wounded the heart of her beloved, and drew him from the heights into her presence. Hence it happened once in the time of which I am going to speak, that the ardors of love in the Most Blessed Mother grew to such proportions that she could truly be said to be languishing with love. Canticle chapter 2, verse 5. For without being affected by the infirmities of our earthly passions, she languished on account of the impetus of her loving heart drawn toward the Lord, in order that just as he was the cause of her ailment, he might also be its glorious medicine and cure. Her holy angels, full of admiration of the effects of their Queen's impetuous love, spoke to her angelic words in order to soothe her ardors by inspiring her with hope of secure possession. But these remedies allayed not the flame, but rather enkindled it, and the great lady answered only by conjuring them to tell her beloved that she was languishing with love. To him they brought her message and presented to him the tokens she desired. On this occasion, and on others of this last part of her life, as I wish especially to state, were fulfilled in her, the only and worthy spouse, the hidden mysteries of the Canticle of Solomon. And so it came that the supreme princes of heaven, who were present in visible form, were obliged to support her in their arms on account of the pains of love that overcame her. 598. Then her divine Son came down from heaven, seated on a throne of glory and surrounded by myriads of angels, who gave him praise and magnificence. Coming to the most blessed Lady, he refreshed and comforted her in her pains, and said to her, My mother, most beloved and chosen for our delight, the clamors and sighs of thy loving soul have wounded my heart. Come, my dove, come to my celestial fatherland, where thy sorrow shall be turned to delight, thy tears into gladness, and where thou shalt rest from thy sufferings. Immediately the holy angels, at his command, placed the queen at the side of the Lord, her divine Son, and with celestial music they all ascended to the empyrean heaven. Mary fell in adoration at the throne of the most holy Trinity. The sacred humanity of Christ kept her at his side, causing new accidental joy to all the courtiers of heaven, and according to our mode of speaking, exciting anew the attention of all the saints. He presented her and spoke to the eternal Father, saying, 599. My Father and eternal God, this is the woman that gave me human form in her virginal womb, that nourished me at her breast and sustained labors for me, that shared in my hardships and cooperated with me in the works of the redemption. This is she who was always most faithful and fulfilled our will according to our entire pleasure. She, pure and immaculate as my mother, through her own works has reached the summit of sanctity according to the measure of the gifts we have communicated to her. When she had merited her reward and could have enjoyed it forever, she deprived herself of it for our glory, and returned to attend to the establishment, the government, and the instruction of the church militant. And we, in order that she might live in it for the succor of the faithful, deferred her eternal rest, which she has merited over and over again. In the highest bounty and equity of our providence, it is just that my mother should be remunerated for her works of love beyond all other creatures, and toward her the common law of the other mortals should not apply. If I have merited for all infinite merits and boundless graces, it is proper that my mother should partake of them above all the others who are so inferior. For she, in her conduct, corresponds to our liberality and puts no hindrance or obstacle to our infinite power of communicating our treasures and participating them as the queen and mistress of all that is created. 600. To these words of the most sacred humanity of Christ, the eternal Father replied, My most beloved Son, in whom I have the plenitude of my pleasure and complacency. Matthew chapter 17, verse 5. Thou art the firstborn, and the head of all the predestined. Romans chapter 8, verse 29. And in thy hands I have placed all things. John chapter 3, verse 35. In order that thou mayest judge with equity all the nations and generations, and all my creatures. John chapter 5, verse 22. Distribute my infinite treasures and communicate them as thou desirest to thy beloved, who clothed thee in passible flesh. Reward her according to her dignity and merit, which are so pleasing in our eyes. 601. In accordance with the pleasure of the eternal Father, Christ our Savior decreed, and as it were pledged himself to his most blessed Mother, in the presence of all the saints, that from henceforth, as long as she should live in mortal flesh, she should, on every Sunday, after finishing her exercises of the Passion, be brought by the holy angels to the empyrean heaven, and there, in the presence of the Most High, celebrate in body and soul the joys of the resurrection. The Lord also decreed that in her daily communion he should manifest to her his most sacred humanity, united to the divinity in a new and wonderful manner, different from that in which she had enjoyed it until that day, so that this might serve as a pledge and foretaste of the glory which he had reserved for his most holy Mother in eternity. All the blessed understood how just were these manifestations of his glory and greatness in his holy Mother, how well they corresponded to the dignity and holiness of the great Queen, and how well they were merited by her full response to the divine operations in her. All of them sang new canticles of praise and glory to the Lord, who was so holy, just, and wonderful in all these works. 602. Then Christ our God turned to his purest Mother and said, My most loving Mother, I shall remain with thee always as long as thy mortal life shall last, and I shall be with thee in a new manner, so wonderful as neither men nor angels have known until now. In my presence thou shalt not feel lonely, and where I am, there shall be my reign. In me shalt thou rest from thy anxieties. I shall be thy recompense in the narrowed space of thy exile. For thee the fetters of thy mortal body shall not be irksome, and soon shalt thou be free of them. Until that day comes, I shall be the end of thy afflictions, and I shall release the barriers still opposing thy loving desires. In all this do I give thee my royal promise. While these promises and favors were lavished upon her, the Most Holy Mary was immersed in her ineffable humility, praising, magnifying, and thanking the Omnipotent for his beneficent liberality, and annihilating herself in her own estimation. Such a spectacle can neither be described nor understood in this life, for here was to be seen the infinite God freely proclaiming his mother worthy of assuming the highest place in the estimation of his infinite wisdom, while she, in rivalry with the infinite power, humiliated herself, abased and annihilated herself, though meriting the exaltation she received. 603. Besides all this, she was enlightened and renewed in all her faculties, in the manner explained elsewhere, for the beatific vision. When she was thus prepared, the veil fell, and for some hours, wrapped in the intuitive vision of God, she enjoyed the essential fruition and glory in a manner far above that of the saints. She drank the waters of life from their own fount. She satiated her most burning desires. She reached her center and rested from that swift motion which she was again to resume as soon as she was to return from her vision. After this vision, she gave thanks to the most blessed Trinity, and again interceded for the Church. Then, entirely refreshed and comforted, the holy angels brought her back to her oratory. There, as described on other occasions, her body had remained in visible form, in order that she might not be missed by the faithful. On leaving the cloud in which she had been borne from heaven, she prostrated herself as usual upon the ground, and humiliated herself for all these favors and benefits more deeply than all the children of Adam ever humiliated themselves for all their sins and miseries. From that time on, as long as she lived, the promise of the Savior in regard to her was fulfilled, and on all Sundays, after she had done with the exercises of the Passion, at the hour of the resurrection, all her angels raised her in a cloud throne to the empyrean heaven, where Christ, her most holy Son, came forth to meet her and unite her with himself. The divinity did not always manifest itself intuitively, but aside of this, the effects and participation of this visit were glorious beyond human capacity to comprehend. On these occasions, the angels were wont to sing that hymn, Regina Caeli Laetare, Alleluia, and these were days of solemn festivity for all the saints, especially for Saint Joseph, Saint Joachim, and Anne, and those more closely connected with her, as well as for her guardian angels. At these visits, she consulted with the Lord about the arduous affairs of the Church, prayed for it, particularly for the apostles, and returned to the earth laden with riches like that ship of the merchant of which Solomon speaks in the 31st chapter of the Proverbs. 604. This privilege, although it was a special grace of the Most High, nevertheless was due to the Most Blessed Mary on two accounts. First, because for the sake of watching over the Church, she voluntarily deprived herself of the joys of the beatific vision, and therefore by the ardors of her love and of seeing God many times suffered the agonies of death. Hence, in order to preserve her life, it was very proper that she should sometimes enjoy the divine presence, and whatever was possible and proper was due to the mother from her Son. Secondly, in renewing every week the memory of the passion of her divine Son, she, as it were, suffered it on her own person, and died with the Lord. Consequently, it was proper that she should rise with him. As he, however, was already glorified in heaven, it was reasonable that she should, through his presence, be made a participant in the joy of his resurrection, and thus reap the fruits of the sorrows and tears she had sown. Psalm 125, verse 5. 605. With regard to the second privilege which the Lord promised her, namely daily communion, I advert that up to the time of which I am speaking, their great queen omitted Holy Communion on some days, as for instance during the journey to Ephesus, during some absences of St. John, and on other occasions. Her profound humility induced her to submit to these omissions, resigning herself without complaint in obedience to the apostles. For in all things, the great lady was the model and mistress of perfection, teaching us self-denial also in such things as appear most holy and proper. But the Lord, who seeks his rest in humble souls, and above all desired to rest and live in the heart of his mother, for the purpose of frequently renewing his wonders, ordained that from this time on she should communicate every day for the rest of her life. This will of the Most High Mary perceived in heaven, but Being most prudent in all her actions, she resolved to wait until it could be executed in obedience to St. John, for she did all things as an humble inferior and as a subject of those by whom she was to be governed in such things. 606. Therefore she did not herself tell St. John of what she had recognized as the will of God, but it happened one day that the evangelist was very much taken up with preaching, and he let the hour for communion pass. She spoke to her holy angels, asking their advice, and they answered that the command of her divine Son ought to be fulfilled, and that they would inform St. John and intimate to him this order of his master. Then one of the angels manifested himself to St. John where he was preaching, and said, John, the Most High wishes that his mother, our Queen, receive him sacramentally every day during her life upon the earth. Thus reminded, the evangelist immediately returned to the cenacle, where the Most Blessed Mary was waiting for Holy Communion, and said, My mother and lady, the angel has told me of the command of the Lord, that I administer his sacramental body to thee each day, without exception. The Most Blessed Mother answered, And thou, sir, what dost thou command in regard to this? St. John replied, That the command of thy Son, my Lord, be fulfilled. And the Queen said, Behold me ready to obey in all things as thy servant. From that day on she received Holy Communion every day, without exception, to the end of her life. Fridays and Saturdays, the days of her exercises, were not accepted, while on Sundays, instead of Holy Communion, she was raised to the empyrean heavens. 607. At the moment when she received in her heart the sacramental species, the sacred humanity of Christ manifested itself through them in the form he had when he instituted the Blessed Sacrament. Although the divinity did not manifest itself in any other than by the abstractive vision now habitual to her, yet the humanity manifested itself to her glorious, much more resplendent and wonderful than at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor. This vision she enjoyed for 3 consecutive hours after receiving Holy Communion, and its effects upon her were such as cannot be described in words. This was the second reward offered to her by her divine Son, to recompense her somewhat for the eternal glory which he had delayed at her own desire. Besides this, there was another reason for this wonder. The Lord wished to recompense himself and counteract beforehand the ingratitude, the lukewarmness, and evil disposition with which the children of Adam were to receive and handle the sacred mystery of the Eucharist during the ages of the Church. If the Most Blessed Mary had not made up for these shortcomings of creatures, the Lord would have earned no sufficient thanks from his creatures, nor could he have been satisfied with the returns made by men for the institution of this sacrament. Instruction which the great Queen of the angels gave me. 608. My daughter, when mortals, having run the short course of their lives, come to the end at which God expects them to merit eternal life, then will they also, by their own experience, see the finish of all their errors and deceits. Then the just will see in what consisted their real salvation and happiness, and the reprobate wherein lay their lamentable and everlasting perdition. Oh, how happy, my daughter, is the man who during the short instant of his life, seeks to anticipate the divine science which he is so soon to possess by experience. This, the true wisdom, not to wait for the end until knowing that end, but look to the end in the beginning of the course, and enter upon it, not with so many doubts whether we shall attain the end, but with some security of attaining it. Consider then with what sentiments those must be animated who at the beginning of a race see a great prize which they can attain by pressing on their course for a time with great diligence. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. Certainly they will set out with all speed, without turning aside or permitting themselves to be detained by any cause whatsoever. And if they press not on, or if they cease to look to the prize at the end of their course, they will be held either as foolish or as ignorant of what they were losing. 609. Such is mortal life of men, a short course, the end of which shall bring to the runner either eternal glory or everlasting torment, as a reward or punishment. All men are born to run this race by the use of their reason and free will, and no one, much less the children of the Church, can plead ignorance as an excuse. Hence, Where is the judgment and good sense of those in the Catholic faith? Why does vanity still retain its hold upon them? Why do they ensnare themselves in the love of what is only apparent and deceitful? Why do they ignore the end to which they shall soon come? Why will they not understand what there awaits them? Do they perhaps not know that they are born but to die? Psalm 138, verse 49. That life is momentary, death infallibly certain, the reward or punishment unavoidable and eternal? 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. What can the lovers of this world answer to these questions? Those that consume all of their short life, for even the longest lives are very short, in accumulating honors or riches, in wasting their strength and powers in the enjoyment of corruptible and most vile pleasures. 610. Alas, my friend, consider how false and treacherous in the world in which thou art born, in which thy eyes behold. In it I desire thee to show thyself as my disciple, my follower, a child of my desires, and a fruit of my prayers. Forget it entirely with a heartfelt abhorrence. Do not lose sight of the end toward which thou runnest so swiftly, the purpose for which thy Creator formed thee out of nothing. Sigh for it continually, and direct toward it thy anxious solicitude. Do not permit thyself to be drawn away by the fleeting, vain, and deceitful things of the world. Let the divine love alone dwell in thee, and engage all thy forces, for that is not a true love, which permits any part of them to be diverted to other things, or which does not free them and mortify them entirely from passing things, and subject them to the one great end. Let this love be in thee strong as death, Canticle chapter 8, verse 6, so that thou mayest be renewed entirely, as I desire. Do not hinder the will of my divine Son in all that he wishes to accomplish in thee, and be assured of his fidelity, which rewards 100-fold, Matthew chapter 19, verse 29. Keep in mind with humble veneration that he has until now wrought in thee, and I exhort thee and admonish thee to experience in thee anew his truths, as I have commanded thee. For all this continue thy exercises with new solicitude in finishing this history, and give thanks to the Lord for the great and inestimable benefits of his having ordered and disposed thy superiors to permit thee to receive him daily in holy communion, preparing thyself for it in imitation of me. Continue also the petitions I have recommended and enjoined upon thee.